been a rich and highly rated comedy of errors this week as the Republicans have taken over the House. But today, Republicans tripped and face-planted into the first of their big mistakes so far that appears to be a purely political miscalculation. Today, Republicans used their newfound power in the House to hold a test vote on repealing the health reform bill that passed the last Congress and that was signed into law by President Obama. And here's where you might have gotten your first inkling that Republicans pressing ahead with this as their marquee first priority in office might be a mistake. After all of the demonization of health reform over the past year, after Republicans used health reform as a cudgel to beat Democrats over the head with during the election, after Republicans convinced conservative Democrats to vote against health reform or even to campaign against health reform, after all of that, today, when it came down to it, when Republicans finally had their big test vote on repealing health reform, their marquee issue, they got precisely 4 Democratic votes. 181 Democrats voted not to repeal health reform, and 4 voted with the Republicans. 4. That's roughly the number of party crossovers you could expect to defect from a vote on whether or not today really is Friday. They got 4 votes. That's it. And that includes one Democrat who says that's the last vote Republicans will get from him on this issue. When it comes to actually voting for repeal, he is not with them. So that means there are a grand total of 3 Democrats in the entire House, out of hundreds of members of the House, who are willing to side with Republicans on repealing health reform. That's it. Even Democrats who not only voted against health reform originally, but are still against health reform. Even Democrats who are willing to go on Fox News to talk about how much they hate health reform, even those Democrats can tell it is a bad idea to vote to repeal it.
To repeal it all, including the few provisions that were beneficial, just doesn't make any sense.
Democratic Congressman Jason Altmaier, not a progressive leader. Jason Altmaier, eager for any opportunity to vote against his own party on anything. Jason Altmaier is not taking this one up. He voted no on health reform, but he's not voting to repeal it. It is amazing news for Democrats that Republicans have decided that this is the hill they want to die on in Washington. This is the first thing they want to do. What they want to broadcast to America about them being in charge is that their first priority is to add $230 billion to the deficit. To be clear, this means they want to make the deficit $230 billion worse. What do they propose to get for adding $230 billion to the deficit? They propose to get 32 million Americans losing their health insurance. Well, who wouldn't pay hundreds of billions of dollars for that? Also, Americans who don't lose their health insurance will have the privilege of paying more for the insurance that they are lucky enough to keep. So your health insurance gets more expensive, 32 million Americans lose their health insurance, and the deficit gets worse by about $250 billion. That's what Republicans are pursuing first. Welcome to power. Welcome to control. You know, thanks to the Jason Altmaiers of the world, thanks to the reflexive timidity of conservative Democrats on issues like this, even when health reform passed last year, Democrats were never really able to create any political capital from passing health reform. They were too busy fighting amongst themselves about what the bill should have had in it and whether or not it was a good idea to do it in the first place and what Republicans might say about it passing, as if Republicans would have anything nice to say if it didn't pass. How did we get from that circular firing squad, Democrats attacking each other, Democrats running from their own accomplishments, fractured Democrats on the issue of health reform? How did we get from that to all but 3 Democrats voting to defend it? The Jason Altmaiers of the world standing unified with the Nancy Pelosi's of the world to defend health reform. Democrats have finally achieved unity. They have finally decided health reform was something worth fighting for. Thank you, John Boehner. All it took was Republicans making it their first priority to take an impotent swipe at taking it away.
You campaigned effectively, you beat us good, you ran on the agenda of defeating health care and repealing it. Now you're doing it. Own it. Admit what it is you are doing. This is not a campaign we're playing with fire. We're taking away health care benefits to make a real difference to our families.
There's no commitment to the American people here. The only commitment is to the insurance companies. They're the only ones that are going to gain from repeal of this very important legislation.
The Republicans are going to allow the return of the worst abuses of the health insurance industry, pre-existing condition exclusions, taking away your policy policy when you get sick, lifetime and annual caps, throwing your kids off your policies. The Republican repeal of this bill would enable all those things for their very, very generous benefactors in the insurance industry. I haven't had a single constituent, and I know you haven't, begged you to bring back these abuses. Is that what you're doing? Is that what they want?
Not only would House Republicans repealing this bill add $230 billion to the deficit, not only would it take away health insurance from 32 million Americans, not only would it have everybody with health insurance pay more, repeal would also allow insurance companies to drop you when you get sick and when you need the coverage the most. Repeal would allow insurance companies to deny you coverage because of a pre-existing condition. Repeal would have insurance companies be allowed to impose annual limits on the amount of care you can get. Maybe you hate the whole idea of the dreaded Obamacare, but who hates the idea of these things? These things that are the constituent parts of health reform, no matter what dismissive nickname you want to give health reform. What political party, what politician would want to hang his political future on fighting for insurance companies' right to drop you once you get sick, even though you've been paying your premiums all along? Insurance companies can't do that anymore because of health reform. So naturally, Republicans want to repeal it. The Republicans' first act, now that they control the House, is to do everything they can to make sure insurance companies are allowed to drop you when you get sick. Even conservative blue dog Democrats are not stupid enough to go along with this. Just because it's something that you plan to do in advance doesn't mean it's not a blunder. Republicans have made a blunder here. They have blundered into finally forcing Democrats to reap the political capital they should have reaped in the first place from passing health reform. Republicans have unified the Democrats on health reform. They have persuaded Democrats to preach to the country about how important the reforms are that they got passed. And they have invited on the floor of the legislature that they control a campaign-ready, what are you doing to the American people defense of health reform as an achievement to be proud of and an achievement to defend. I hesitate to believe that Democrats could have achieved this alone. But with John Boehner in charge, anything is possible.
The Democrats' health care law helps grandma afford her prescription drugs. The Republicans don't care about grandma. They want to take back the drug benefits in the new law. GOP used to stand for Grand Old Party. Now it stands for grandmas out of prescriptions.
Democratic Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts. He is a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and he joins us now from Washington. Congressman Markey, thank you so much for being here tonight.
No, good evening, Rachel.
Has the Republican effort to repeal health reform as their first action right out of the gate in the House, to make this their signature first priority, has that unified Democrats in defense of health reform in a way that didn't happen when you were trying to pass it in the first place?
Well, you know, George Bush and Republicans, they always say that they're uniters and not dividers. And congratulations, you have united the Democratic Party in a way in which it has not been for 2 years. I think that the Democrats are now rallying around those provisions that protect children, protect grandma, protect against people going bankrupt just because they become sick, protect the free prevention screenings, which everyone is entitled to in the bill. And I think the more that people understand actually what was in the bill is the better the Democrats are going to do. So we welcome this debate because it's helping us now finally to explain what the fight was all about.
Do you feel like, I mean, what Republicans are doing here is obviously something they think will have great symbolic and therefore political power. Even if repeal passes the House next week, as it's expected to because of the Republican majority, it's not going to become law. The Senate is not going to pass it. The president wouldn't sign it even if it did. Is this also a political opportunity to Democrats, not just to articulate what's right about reform, like you just did, but to really sell the idea of the American people and turn it into a political asset instead of a liability?
Yeah, I think that we are now going to be able to take advantage of the result of the Citizens United case last year, which allowed tens of millions of dollars that are still unknown in terms of the source to come into the political system. Today, we saw the first installment yes, they now have to pay back the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, and try to repeal this bill. And then we'll move down to what the oil and gas and coal industries think they've bought from this Republican Congress, and on and on. And the more that we have these debates, I think, is the greater our prospects will be for turning this whole thing right around in the election of 2012.
In the last Congress, Congressman Markey, you, of course, chaired the House Select Committee for Energy Independence and Global Warming. One of the Republicans' first acts upon taking power in the House was to disband that committee. What's the message there, and how important is that decision?
Well, I think the message is that in the same way that more than 50% of all Republican primary voters do not believe in evolution, a very high percentage of them do not believe in the science of climate, even though in 2010 we had the warmest recorded year in history. We had the Chinese eating our lunch in solar and wind and selling those technologies around the world. We can see at the pump that the price of gasoline is going up and all that money is going over to the Middle East. But again, the oil industry basically bought a result last year, and the first installment, and I guess in a way it's a perverse honor, was to abolish the committee that I was the chair of, the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming that Nancy Pelosi created 4 years ago and asked me to be the chair of. So I do believe that in the same way they don't believe in healthy families, they don't believe in a healthy planet either. And it all goes back to their basic belief that we don't have to put the prevention measures in place that help both families and a planet avoid catastrophic consequences by neglecting the obvious warning signs that science presents to us.
Democratic Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts, thank you for your time tonight, sir. I think
Can I just say this?
Yeah,
Can I
please.
just add one more thing? Yeah. You know, Ben Franklin at the Constitutional Convention, he was there and helping to draft this very important document. And one of the other things that he was saying to his buddies there was an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's what this health care bill has in it. We don't want to run a sick care system anymore. We want to run a health care system, and that's why we move the whole system towards prevention, where 75% of all the costs in our medical system is caused by preventable diseases. And so this whole thing goes right back to the Constitutional Convention and Ben Franklin's admonition to all of those who were there and every American. And all we are doing is abiding by it, and I think American families are starting to get it.
And if Republicans wanted to hear Democrats wax constitutional and wax poetic about the importance of health reform again, they have gotten their wish by putting this at the top of their agenda. Sir, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Congressman